educate at that point. And people's knowledge of wine, especially in the U.S. over the last 15 years, has really, really changed.
Sure.
I still think you got a long ways. You got the little things to learn and teach and that, but if you look at the just the overall education that people have got on wine, they've changed.
I mean, look at the attitude to rosé.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a prime example, right?
Yeah.
Just take rosé as an example.
Right. Like rosé is.
They went from what is it to I gotta have it. I gotta have it now. Right? Yeah.
I know. Yeah, no, it's been kind of fun to see that over the last several years change, not just with rosé, but especially with the younger generation. People just want to try new stuff.
Yeah. No, that's me and wine. You know what I mean? You ask, what's my favorite wine?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to be flippant, but what I'm drinking at the time is my favorite wine because really what I like to do is explore when it comes to wines. I love to just try different varieties, different winemakers. That's one of the things that I've really noticed is you'll kind of align to more of a winemaker style, and you will find winemakers that are more aligned with what you like from a style, and you can just about taste any of their wines and you'll love it.
Yeah.
You can go to other winemakers that the styles, they do something different, and you can't find one of the wines that they have on their sheet that you really, really like, right?
Yeah.
So I think, for me, that's what I really love is just exploring wine, exploring all the different varieties, the odd ones, trying it, tasting it, seeing who does what. That's, for me, that's the fun of wine, and that's what,
Well, it's a good reason to be in the industry then, in one way or another.
Yeah.
And I got the signal that I am supposed to welcome everyone watching to the Cinder live tasting. It's almost the end of July. It's really hot outside, so we're inside. Got rosé poured out, ready to go. I am really thrilled to have Tim Martin, managing partner of Emerald Slope, out in Adrian, Oregon with me today. Thanks for coming, Tim.
You're welcome.
And today we're going to talk about the viticulture side of the wine industry. Tim is super experienced out here in the Treasure Valley, and we source a lot of fruit from Emerald Slope. They're one of our favorites, and it's really going to be awesome. And he even brought props, so we can see, what's going on out in these vineyards. They're still cooking. The virus hasn't stopped the grapes from growing. So before we get to that, and before I take a sip of this wonderful rosé, I do want to remind people that we are still open 7 days a week. Tastings by reservation only. Give us a call at 208-906-0555 and we will get you in. One reservation per hour. And our outside patio, I know you see the weather this weekend and you're like, no way, not going outside. But we have mist, we have shade, we have wine. Come on down, hang out with us. It looks great, and we miss everybody, and we hope to see you soon. And then the last thing I'll say is because it's so hot around the country, we are discouraging shipping for most of these wines. Wines do not like heat, and we want to make sure the quality is really good. But if you're local, any 3-bottle or more order, we will deliver that to you, complimentary. So please keep that in mind. If you need your fix and it's too hot and you can't leave your house, if you're just melting on a chair somewhere, we'll get your wine to you. And with that in mind, let's drink some rosé, and then we can talk about the viticulture.
Thank you.
So Tim, I guess first, for people that are watching that don't know, what is Emerald Slope, and where is it, and how did it get started?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So Emerald Slope, as you mentioned, is just upslope from the little town of Adrian, right along the Snake River, really between Homedale and Nissa. There's, on the Oregon side, as you mentioned, the Snake River AVA does cover both sides of Oregon, both sides of the state line, Oregon and Idaho. So it's about a 500-acre area right there in just the big bend of the Snake River that's Oregon and Idaho. So.
Yeah. And then why that location? So when you started it, how did it start?
Yeah.
Why that property?
Yeah, a little bit of background on that, right? So I grew up in Adrian. It's where I'm from. It's where our family's been since about 35, 36.
Okay.
When my dad moved there, my dad was a blacksmith and helped with all of the farming industry and the farming growth around there. Growing up on the property, it was always one of those. It was a farm, but we always had something else that we were doing as well when it comes to the machine shop and that side of things, right? So how we got started was really, as the property transitioned through families, my brother purchased the property, and we decided as a family we were going to start a project to try to, clean the property up and figure out, okay, what can we do? What sounds fun? What sounds romantic? Nothing more romantic than a vineyard and the wine side of things, right? So we started out there and decided we would clear off about a 4.5 acre spot and plant our first block of Tempranillo in 2002.
Okay. So 2002, you and your brother, this new thing, and you're planting Tempranillo. So where's the inspiration? Like, why Tempranillo?
Well, there was, again, a consultant that came through in the early 2000s, really trying to help the Idaho wine industry grow, right? And his recommendation, it was a gentleman by the name of Richard Smart, and his recommendation was really the wine industry within Idaho and the Snake River area really needed to find what is that variety, what is that grape that we could really say, this is what we do and this is what we do well, right? And he recommended Tempranillo, again, somewhat aligned with, if you look at the Rioja region and the environmental side of the Rioja region when it comes to weather and that, very hot, very high desert type environment, very similar to here. So that was one of those that we weren't in the industry at that point where we needed to make or break, right? We could take some risk. We could say, okay, let's just throw down and do something here, right? So that was where we really went with Tempranillo and said, let's just go try it. No one else is trying it. We don't have to, we really don't have to make a true go of this. We can experiment and do that. So that's where we kind of jumped into Tempranillo to try to, again, help the industry and try something new. Our first plantings, we definitely had some setbacks and some good education in the first plantings. We, as with any project that way, there's always opportunities, right? So I think we lost about 70% of our vines that first year, and had to go back through and replant the next year. So it was always a bit of a challenge as we got started. So,
and we have some Tempranillo.
We do
right here. So I'll show this to the camera a little bit, and as you can see, we have a little bit of color change going on, and that's called veraison. And Tempranillo is one of the earliest in this valley to change colors in the grapes. And so I guess, Tim, when that color change happens, what's going on with the fruit?
So really that's a transition where the fruit now has done all of its cell development. It's gone through bloom, it's completely grown and divided cells to the point that it's going to now start adding sugars to the grape, right? So with that you see in the Tempranillo this color change starting to come in there, and as you mentioned, veraison in that context. So you're going to start to see sugars added, you're going to start to see acids go down, and you're going to start to see fruit balancing out. With the color of veraison that we have in the cluster there that you see, that gives us also a good indication. We're probably about that 6 weeks from harvest, right? So with this, we're kind of end of July, which is pretty normal for Tempranillo. We typically go through and net our Tempranillo the last week of July almost every year religiously, just to keep the birds out of it, because the birds really love it. So that gives us probably second week of September, somewhere right about that time frame for harvest, trying to hit that, the sugars at about 23 bricks.
So one thing you do then, you put netting over this Tempranillo. That's one thing you change. And just like our customers, the birds love Tempranillo as well. But would you do that, for example, so over here we have some Viognier, and as you can see, there's no color change yet on the Viognier. Is there anything that you do different? Like, how different are each grape vine that you have in terms of your process when you go through this out in the vineyard?
Yeah, so today we're growing 9 different varieties, so we have 9 different science projects that we're working on that have to be managed 9 different ways, right? And that's 9 different ways as they're going through the phases. As you mentioned, you've got Tempranillo, you've got some Viognier and a little bit of Cab. They're all at different phases in the grape development, right? So as we're starting to see the veraison in the Tempranillo, some of the things that we're going to start to change is our water management. We're going to hold it a lot tighter. We know at that point in time we're really done going through with our fungicides and really starting to, not too worried now with the heat that's coming on, not too worried about any of the powdery mildews and those types of things. And then there's one thing that the birds really love, and that is the Tempranillo. They'll come through and clean it up if you don't net it, or if you don't have another method, right? There's a multitude of methods. We choose netting just because of our block sizes, and it's somewhat manageable, right? There's a multitude of other vineyards around that have larger areas that they're covering with lasers, they're covering with sound systems. So there's
Like cannons.
yeah, like cannons, like imitation hawk sounds, all
Sure.
of the different things like that. I think one of the most effective that's coming on recently is the lasers. It's an interesting technology. It's not, it's fairly new to the industry. I would think in the vineyard side of things, where probably the last 3 years it's proven itself very, very valuable. And it's interesting how the birds just see that little bit of movement and don't like it at all.
Right. So you said like 9 different varieties, and you have 9 different science projects. So your first planting in Tempranillo in 2002, 70% of the vines are gone. What do you learn from that, and like how do you learn how to do this?
Yeah, that's it's education by fire at sometimes, and and again, if you look at the science side of it, it's that failure that you really that you really learn from, right? And there's a lot you learn from that. You learn sourcing material, right? Okay, did we source the material from the right place? What was wrong with the material? What could we have done better? You go back through and root cause really what what the failure was about. I think the big key is don't get frustrated. Don't let it get you down. Know that that's how you're going to learn as you go throughout the process. And the one unique thing about the vineyard side of things and the continuing learning process of that is it's a year-to-year cycle. So you learn every year with what you're doing, whether it's just a new planting, as you mentioned in the Tempranillo, or whether it's a planting that's been there for some point in time and you get, per se, a hailstorm, or you get a pest that you've never seen in your vineyard before. Neighbors do have influences on vineyards, and that's something that that we always end up dealing with. We've had neighbors that plant things that have had negative impacts on our. We've had thrift before that come out of some onions at one point. But, so yeah,
Onions, grapes, not.
well, there's just again, it's not that those crops don't mix well together. It's just understanding what impacts those crops have on the vineyard, I think, is the biggest key thing, and predicting what those are, right?
Yeah.
Because again, anywhere you've got a vineyard, most vineyards are going to be fairly small. You're going to have neighbors doing lots of things around you, and that's always a bit of a challenge. Everybody is great to work with. They understand really what you're trying to accomplish, and they're also sensitive to the uniqueness of what the fruit is and what the crop is. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and what do you think makes Emerald Slope unique in the Snake River Valley? Like, as a site,
yeah.
what's different about Emerald Slope than some other places, some other vineyards?
Yeah, there's probably about 3 things that are really different, right? So Emerald Slope in an elevation standpoint, if we look at some of the other vineyard sites in the Snake River, AVA, they're roughly around that 2,900, 2,800 feet elevation. So Emerald Slope is a little lower. We're a little further downstream of the Snake River. We're also really trapped very closely between the Snake River and the desert of the Owyhees. Directly behind us, we have the Owyhee drainage with the Owyhee Dam and the Owyhee Reservoir. The desert out there develops a lot of heat in the summer, and a lot of that heat comes into the valley and creates airflow. So we have a constant breeze out there, which helps us in a lot of different ways, right? It tempers the temperature a little bit. It also helps us in the early mornings dry the vines out, so we don't have a lot of powdery mildew pressure. We get that airflow through our canopies. So I would say elevation. I would say the impacts of just the density of the desert and the size of the desert and being trapped between the desert and the river. And lastly, really the soil types. Where we're at on Emerald Slope, again, a lot of the vineyards are in more, the Snake River AVA are in more volcanic type soils. Where the ridge that we're on is really trapped more in the sedimentary side of things. So we have a butte behind us that's really straight pea gravel. And from there, that pea gravel over the years has eroded down the hill and down the slope to where it's dropped the larger materials at the top. And then as we get down to some of our lower blocks closer to the river, it becomes much more sandy. So it's kind of unique how the soil types change and how the soil types are different, I would say, than any of the rest of the vineyards around the Snake River AVA. So.
And so 9 different grapes, and you have the main 13 acres on the lower slope. How did you go about choosing those grapes? Was there an influence or someone you consulted with in the last 15, 18 years? Like, how have you gone through with that decision based on the uniqueness of the site, the soil, and also, I guess, what you want to plant?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I've been very open to input and feedback on that. Right, we've worked very closely with Melanie on developing varieties that can go from the vineyard to the tasting room that are marketable. Right, we do have some unique ones like the Verdejo.
Sure.
That's one that, it's kind of like the Tempranillo. It started out as a bit of an experiment, right?
Coming soon, fall release, people.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, we've been able to kind of try some of the tried and trues, the Cabernets, the Merlots, the Malbecs, and then we've been able to, work with Melanie and the cedar side of things and experiment in some of those. So, our lower site was really, a bit of an experiment of what are some of the varieties that we really can do and we can do successfully, right, for that site. And as we move up the slope, we'll be continuing some of those varieties. Obviously, Tempranillo, we'll be moving some of that, developing some of the property up the site into Tempranillo. We're focused a lot more on Rhone varietals from the influence of the Viognier and the experiment that we had there. We've had some great success with the Viognier. So we're looking at more of the Rhone varietals in a block and planted a 7-acre block of nothing other than just Rhone varietals. So mix of red and white. So
beautiful.
I think, one of the things that we've done is really listen to what the market is looking for within the Snake River AVA as we're trying to develop what are the wines of this region that really stand out. So
yeah,
there are some site-specific things that we've done that I believe have been fairly successful, but I think there's also some of those that we've had that we've learned from. So
yeah, and that newer upper site, when did that start getting planted, and
so
what's the goal with that
goal
site?
and the vision, right? So the upper, what I'll refer to as the upper Emerald Slope, right, is, as I mentioned, it's much closer to the butte and closer to the larger gravels that have eroded down that slope. So we've got a lot of gravel area. Right now we're working on a 47-acre area that we're looking at developing. We've again started that first 7 acres. And the goal there is really to look and see how can we partner with others on Emerald Slope and really create that area as a great wine growing area of the Snake River AVA. In developing, the uniqueness that we have there, of the uniqueness of the soils, the uniqueness of that area between the desert and the Snake River. As we were going through it and developing, a quick story, right? As we were going through and developing it, in that 47 acres, we went through and dug 32 pits to really profile the soils, right? And as we went through and profiled those, we've got 5 different soils there, everything from gravel to a sandy area and a silty loam. I think one of the funnest things we found, and and I wish I would have brought it even to share because I didn't. You know, I wish was in one of the pits down about, I'm going to say about 6.5 feet down in the pit. There was an 1.5 layer of pure volcanic ash.
Huh.
And the geologist we were working with, right? It was really his assumption at that point in time was really it's volcanic ash from the eruption of Crater Lake that had drifted that far, and you know the hillside had eroded and covered it with about 6 feet of material.
That's
since
crazy.
that was laid down, right? So, and it's really fun because I mean it's it feels like talcum powder. It's just the softest, and it's just a layer in there that is just clear down in there again. Some of the uniqueness that you find as you investigate
Yeah.
and start developing.
Well, I think one of the interesting things that people forget about growers, so you don't make any wine on site, you don't have your own label.
No.
You sell the fruit, and the vineyard, you want to grow and create the best quality fruit possible. And then you also, though, have people purchasing the fruit, winemakers that have their own vision.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you balance that? How do you balance, you know, your passion and your vision with a winemaker who might see something different, and how do you kind of find a way to meet in the middle?
Right. I would have to say, you know, not only is my passion in growing fruit and growing good quality, I have a true passion for collaboration, right? That's one of the things that I really believe drives the quality, drives everybody to really improve as we go forward, right? If we can collaborate together, at the end of the day, we can have a much better product than we can if we're doing this individually, right? So the inputs that we get from the winemakers are truly valuable inputs. I mean, it's, I think what's really changed us from more of a, you know, just a hobby to where really it's more of a profession, right? And you're really getting the quality, and I think you can see the quality in the wines that are being produced off of it, right? So we work closely with the winemakers, and it's that overall collaboration as a community that we can, you know, that I thrive off of. So again, it's a bit of a passion for me to work with others and help me learn and help them do what they're trying to do to succeed as well. So.
And before we get to a couple really good viewer questions, what's your greatest enjoyment with the vineyard now?
Well, I think the greatest enjoyment with the vineyard is everyone from our family's involvement and just seeing how it has evolved over the last 20 years, right? And I think my enjoyment is just seeing the vision of where it came from and where it's going and how we're really gonna, you know, change the area of Emerald Slope, how we're going to, you know, make an impact in the Idaho wine industry with that site and with that area as we go through and develop it. So, you know, for me, I'm a visionary guy. I love that piece of it. So that's where I get.
And if you like Cinder, you'll like Emerald Slope, because we get so much fruit from them, honestly. So let's get to some viewer questions here. Do you need to do anything special for pollinators? Any special practices to attract? Now there's a question I'm glad you're here for, because I have no answer for that.
That's a great question, actually. Pollinators, when it comes to grapes, grapes at bloom we'll refer to as self-pollinating, but they also can have some very significant environmental impacts. Unlike almonds or, you know, fruit trees in that standpoint, we don't need a pollinator to come through and pollinate them. They will pollinate themselves with the wind and the breeze, but as they do go through and pollinate, they can have some environmental impacts that change how fruits does set. So you can see some clusters at times that will have very few berries and potentially didn't set the fruit as you would have expected in you know, a bloom that is set by a physical pollinator, whether that being a bee.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And fruit sets generally at a certain part of the year where you can expect it, right? So if you're looking at
It's pretty predictable, yeah.
a vine and you see, okay, that cluster looks a little off,
Yeah.
that might clue you in something like that might have
Exactly.
taken place.
And it can be a rainstorm that comes through. It can be a temperature change that comes through that really does impact that. For us in this region, fruit set is typically on most varieties. You're going to see a little variation, but that anywhere from kind of that last week of May to the second week of June.
Okay.
And very predictable in there from year to year.
So a lot of variables as usual.
There's a lot of variables that come into it. Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so how have you seen the Snake River Valley change? You started growing before the AVA was established.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great example. So
No, that is
what
a great
what
example.
else have you seen?
Oh yeah, the AVA is a big one.
Yeah.
Just recognition in the industry from the AVA is a big portion of it. I think I've seen a lot of the practices changes, a lot of the influences that have come into the industry external, and I think that's one thing about the Idaho wine industry is that everybody's very open to input, and we've gotten a lot of input in the industry on the practices of growing grapes. We have a significant different cycle of our grape growing today than we did 20 years ago. As we think about through the year, starting before we ever prune, we'll go through and cross-section buds, and again use that data to predict our pruning of what we want for our yield. Our pruning practices are different. 20 years ago, we would go through and just prune 3 buds per spur. We wouldn't do any counting. We wouldn't do anything at pruning to really predict what we're going to have for yield. Today, like I said, we're cross-sectioning buds to see what our bud life is throughout the winter. Our Tempranillo is an example. We'll go through and single bud prune that. Our Viognier will do an alternative where it's 2 bud, 3 bud pruned. And again, as we go into doing shoot thinning early on is not something we did. Over the last probably 15 years, we've really developed our practices around shoot thinning on the different varieties. We didn't do any leaf stripping 10 years ago. Now we open up the fruit zones so early, and we open them up early as soon as we see like a BB-sized grape on there. We'll get those leaves off there so that we can start getting sunlight into the grapes. And the practices of when we leaf strip have changed, right? There was one point in time we would leaf strip a little later, then we would get sunburn. What we learned was let's strip as early as we can. The grapes are out in the sun the whole time, and they don't get the sunburn. They're used to it at that point. So a lot of the management practices in the vineyard for us, as well as others within the industry of the Snake River AVI, I think is the biggest thing. Our irrigation practices, our mildew management practices, our canopy management practices, all have changed significantly
And it's
in the
just
last 20 years.
And it's just increasing the quality of the fruit.
It is,
and thereby the
improving
wine.
the quality in the fruit, and it does. It shows in the bottle, right?
Yeah.
So,
all right, last one. How are this year's grapes looking so far? I knew we'd get that question.
it's a great. Yeah.
I mean, you can see them right now. They look so good.
Exactly. They look good. I would say they're really progressing as we would predict. I think this year, from an environmental standpoint, we've had a very, I'm not going to say average year, but we've had an interesting year when it comes to water. Our end of May, early June was very wet. We got about 3 inches of rain, when annually we only get about 11 inches of rain throughout the year. Within that 3-week period, we've got 3 inches of rain. That's been an interesting one for us to manage throughout the summer as we manage our canopy growth. The vines have really not shut down. So we've got, extra shading in there that we've had to manage. I think when it comes to the fruit quality, this week's going to be really our first, what I would say, hot week, that above 100 degree, where the vines say, we're not doing anything, we're just going to sit here and try to survive this. Up until now, the vines have been doing very well. They're all very healthy, and they're producing great fruit, as you can see, kind of the Tempranillo again. That's exactly where we would expect it to be this last week of July, starting to show a little bit of color.
So vines sometimes are like us. It gets too hot.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be doing anything except surviving.
Yep.
And we've done more than survive at this interview. I think we've thrived, and I've been really happy to sit down and talk with you today, Tim.
Absolutely.
Thanks for all the great questions from the audience. And again, if you like Cinder Wine, you like Emerald Slope, Tempranillo, Malbec we get from you.
Yes.
Viognier, which is incredible. We get a lot of Viognier from them. And we also are looking forward to getting some Verdejo this fall. So
Yeah.
best of luck the rest of the growing season.
Thank
and
you.
don't forget, if you need some wine, we have this flask back in action. Come fill up at the station outside at the bar. Come see Christina this weekend. And also, if you need home delivery, give us a call and we'll take care of you. Until next week, thanks for tuning in. From Cinder, I'm Tyler. This is Tim. Have a good rest of your weekend, everybody.